Share. All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Montgomery County Taxpayers League. Tonight we are hosting Council Vice President Friedson. My name is Esther Wells and I am currently the president of the Montgomery County Taxpayers League. Please check us out on our website at www.mctaxpayersleague.org. Follow us on social media, on Facebook, MCTL, on Twitter at MoCo Taxpayers, or you can email me directly at presidentmctl@gmail.com. So the objective of the Montgomery County Taxpayers League is to educate and advocate for county taxpayers. We support appropriate actions to achieve greater efficiencies and effectiveness in Montgomery County government and tax equity for Montgomery County taxpayers. Our vision is focused on performance and outcome. We host presentations with local elected and appointed officials on topics which have an impact on the county's finances and consequently our taxes. We also take part in various public meetings and other advocacy. So upcoming events that we have planned for the rest of the year, we've reached out to the Montgomery County Department of Transportation for a November meeting with Director Chris Conklin. And in December, on December 6th at 7 p.m., please mark your calendars. We will be meeting with Brian Hull, the Chief Operating Officer at MCPS, to discuss upcoming FY 2025 operating budget and answer any community questions. So if you're interested in joining us, please check out our website, reach out to me. There are a few positions open in our leadership role, also to volunteer for our special events and community events. If you're aware of anything that's going on in the community that you think we should be aware of, definitely please send it our way. We're happy to be involved and to do some advocacy work. And so with that, I am going to introduce our guest of the hour, Andrew Friedson. So Andrew Friedson is a District 1 council member, proudly representing Bethesda, Chevy Chase, and Potomac in Montgomery County, Maryland, for his second term. Andrew was elected in 2018 as the youngest council member in Montgomery County's history and continues to make history as the youngest ever council vice president. Very cool. He chairs the Planning, Housing, and Parks PHP committee and serves on the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy, the GO committee. Councilmember Friedson established a $100 million revolving housing production fund and spearheaded legislation to incentivize smart growth housing near transit. He co-authored the county's largest ever climate investment with the Montgomery County Green Buildings Now Act and sponsored legislation to provide guaranteed paid parental leave for county employees. He has been a consistent advocate for transparency in county government and has led efforts to strengthen financial oversight and the county's ethics law, improve the budget process, and reform the county's property tax system. He is a leader for working families and sponsored the paid parental leave and right to nourish bills to make sure Montgomery County continues to attract and retain talent so we can best serve our residents. He's been referred to as the economic and fiscal center of the Montgomery County Council. Andrew has become known for his work enhancing quality of life, growing the local economy, and modernizing county government with a pragmatic, data-driven approach. He has built broad coalitions to tackle big issues to make Montgomery County more attractive, accessible, and affordable for families and businesses. So please help me welcome Mr. Friedson, and thank you for joining us this evening to discuss your role at the council and answering questions from the community.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all the work that you all do to keep us honest and to hold us accountable. It's really important. It's really, what democracy is intended to be. We're caretakers here of the taxpayer dollars and of the public trust, and I take that very seriously and appreciate the important role that you all play. And I got to say, it sounds really good when you write it. So thanks for reading that exactly as I asked you to do. But I kid. You've heard mostly a lot of the work that we've done. It's really focused a lot around making government work better. Both not just addressing the budget process, but our tax policy and our tax structure. I've tried to look at the way in which the county works and to try to address it. We've created the revenue monitoring group modeled off of the state. That was my prior background, as I think and so I try to take some of that background, some of that understanding, and to try to implement it at the county level. I mean, the reality is we are as large as many states. 6 or 7 states have a budget like we have. And we are still transitioning into the type of government structures and fiscal oversight that you would expect from a state in a state budget. And that's a process. It takes work, it takes attention, and these are not necessarily the sexiest issues. But that's why I have felt really strongly about the work we've done to strengthen oversight, the Public Accountability and County Transparency Act, the PACT Act, that I worked really hard on. A lot of the efforts to improve the budget process, as noted. A lot of the efforts to improve our ethics. In terms of public trust, I recognize that we still have work to do. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. I am sure you will continue to push us to do more. But I really have dedicated much of the last 5 years in county government to try to focus on these issues. My view has always been that we are here because of taxpayers. We're here because of the trust that you place in us, and the dollars that we spend and invest are your dollars, and we have to be careful stewards of those dollars. And I take that very seriously, and I have focused quite a bit of time on it. I also think it's important to realize, where that money comes from. It's the budgets of residents and businesses that create the county budget. So we need a much stronger economy to be able to continue to support vulnerable residents, to be able to continue to invest in county priorities, to be able to maintain the high quality of life that we've all become accustomed to. I mean, it starts and it ends with our ability to grow a thriving county economy for residents and for businesses, recognizing that people have choices. Businesses have choices of where they invest, and residents have choices of where they spend their money and where they want to move. And, for a long time, we have banked on the fact that Montgomery County is a really great place. And that is still true, by the way. And, I try to push back when people beat up too much on Montgomery County. But there is a balance of both being honest about the challenges that we face and dealing with them head on, and acknowledging that, it's not a terrible thing to be in Montgomery County. It's actually a great thing to be in Montgomery County. And there are unlimited numbers of jurisdictions all over the world that would trade their assets for ours any day. There's almost no other place on earth that wouldn't want what we've got. And I think the challenge has been we haven't always been as good as the sum of our parts. And I think that's true from an economic standpoint in Montgomery County. And I think that's true, frankly, from a government standpoint. We have really talented people, and we have really great county staff. And generally, on a day-to-day basis, they do incredible work. They are deeply, deeply committed. I am incredibly grateful to those efforts. But it requires management and leadership and vision. And I think sometimes we have lacked that, to be candid. And that is not a knock on hardworking county employees, because, like I said, I think they do a great job. And frankly, I think they're asked to do a lot, sometimes more than they can reasonably do. But it is a recognition that, I think sometimes our win-loss record is not as good as our roster. And I think that means that you got to do something about the coach and coaching, and we need to change our strategy. And maybe our offense needs, a little bit of updates at times. And we can't run, an outdated offense in a modern, in a modern sport here. And that's what we're in. And the competitive environment, frankly, has changed in Montgomery County. And I think we have to own that. When change happens, you have 3 options. You can ignore it, you can fight it, or you can embrace it. And I don't think we've fought it per se. I think some jurisdictions have fought change. I think some people have fought change, to be honest with you. But I think in general, the county has not necessarily fought change, but we've ignored it for a long time. And that is not a winning strategy. And as we have ignored it and are now trying to catch up to some of the time that we had been ignoring it, every jurisdiction around us has stepped up their game. And, the days when Montgomery County was going to beat out Northern Virginia or beat out DC or beat out Prince George's County or Howard County or Frederick County or the city of Baltimore, even in certain cases, those days are numbered. and they have good options too, and they have good schools and good economic environments and good assets as well. And we need to make sure that we are competing on that level. So that's really what I have focused most of my time on. We have some real challenges. Housing has been a big one. I chair the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee, as you know, and that is a major crisis. It's a moral challenge for families and for individuals. It's also an economic challenge because, frankly, most of our businesses talk about the challenge that they have to attract staff who don't want to move here or can't afford to stay here and take a job somewhere else because their wage can go a lot further somewhere else. And so, that's an area that we need to really address. So look forward to getting into the questions. It is an honor to be the Vice President of the County Council, to be able to serve in this role and to be able to work with committed residents. I joke around that, the Montgomery County residents and District 1 residents do a very good job of keeping me on my toes. And you all are examples of that as super engaged dedicated activists and citizens. And I want to once again thank you for that and look forward to a good conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the thorough intro. No, everything you said is so spot on. And I've been very grateful for your perspective on the council. I do think that you bring together a lot of political views that you're able to just be very center and very grounded and rooted in what is in the best interest of residents. So definitely thank you for all your good work. And that gets us right into our first question. My understanding is as the VP that you are the presumptive next president of the county council, which would start, I believe, in December. And so can you please give us some insight into what changes you plan to implement in this new leadership role? What's top of mind for you as the next president? What do you hope to accomplish in your year of presidency?
Yeah, well, the colleagues will have to take a vote, and certainly I have proven time and time again that there's still plenty of time for me to screw things up. I don't want to be presumptive here, but I will tell you, to me, my priorities have not changed since the day I joined the council, and I don't foresee that being any different if I were to have the trust of colleagues and to be able to assume the role as president. I have focused a lot on process, and if people know me, they know that I care a lot about policy, but I care just as much about process because I think that trust and faith in our council and our county government relies on people understanding that there is a fair, accountable, transparent process, and that we're consistent and that we're accountable to it. And so I will continue to do that, to advocate for that, to make sure that transparency, accountability are hallmarks. That's been what I have focused mostly on and will continue. And then from a policy standpoint, you've heard it. Economic development and competitiveness has been a key area for me. I think we have work to do in that arena. I think everybody talks about it. We all, say we're for it, but we don't necessarily put that at the forefront of every decision that we're making. I have tried to do that. I will continue to try to do that, come up with more creative ideas. There, as you know, and several people in the Taxpayers League were supportive of the economic impact statements on all county bills. I think we need to use it. It's now we have it. The question is, what do we do with it? And we have to be willing to do it. And we'll talk about that with SAG and some of the other things, because, it's one thing to, put things in front of colleagues. It's another thing to actually respond to it and prioritize it. Of course, affordable housing, that will continue to be one of the main issues. It's one of the main reasons why I ran in the first place. People thought it was crazy to run on economic development and affordable housing in District 1 in the aftermath of the Bethesda downtown plan and Westbard and others when that seemed to be a challenge. But I've been very consistent in what I think the challenges are for the county and how I think we need to address them. I've tried to be open to different viewpoints, but I think my general focus on those issues haven't changed. Obviously, fiscal oversight, that has really been an area that I think I brought to the council that is unique to most other people's backgrounds. who have come to the council. I've tried to really hone in on that. You saw that during COVID when I was tough, and I'll continue to be tough on FEMA reimbursements and on the spending of federal dollars and on the budget. And I've tried to be collaborative and collegial and to work with colleagues and focused on being in a body of 9 and now 11 and working with the county executive as much as we can, but also calling things as I see them and being honest and upfront about the sustainability or lack thereof of our fiscal realities and the economic challenges and the economic dynamics that we have to grapple with in county government. That is not going to change. And I think we're in a moment now with MCPS where I believe in a great public school system. And I believe in ensuring that we have educators who are paid what they deserve and that we can recruit and retain them at a time when it's very challenging to be a teacher and where counselors are in short supply and special educators are in even shorter supply. And we face some real issues there. But we also need to make sure that over $3 billion is invested in an appropriate way and that it is going to our key priorities and that we can hold those dollars accountable. And I think, we are limited to a certain extent under state law, as you know, but we do have some opportunities, I think, to do more than we have done. I think we can do it in a collaborative way, working with the Board of Education, but they have a job to do. It's an important job, and we have a job to do, which is an important job. And I don't think we should do their job, and I don't think they should do our job, but I think we all have to do our jobs. And I think there's a way for us to do that, and I'll continue to be looking for ways to do that better than we have previously done it, and to really make sure that we are working towards a shared goal. I know that there's some questions that are probably going to come up about that, so I'll just leave it at that. But the bottom line here is, I think if you ask most people who have followed me on the county council of, what are your priorities and what are you going to work on, the same thing I said on my first day in office is probably the same thing that I would say today. And I would guarantee a year from now, if we have the same conversation, the same themes, the same focus, the same priorities are probably what you're going to hear from me as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that a good segue into kind of our first question as it relates to the budget. And so can community members expect increased transparency on the budget process, supplemental appropriation for source of funds, general funds, budget reconciliation? I know recently, maybe it was last week, Council President Glass announced during his media briefing that there are some changes coming to the county council's process in how they would approve the supplemental appropriations for general funds. Maybe you can touch on that a little bit, and if there are any unique things that you would like to add on as a next president or as someone that's part of the GO committee, as that would be the baseline committee that will always be involved. And then also talk about for the budget, how can council reconciliation process be made more transparent and facilitate debate over strategic priorities that produce results instead of ranking the budget inputs shown in the reconciliation list. Last go at it, FY 2024 operating budget process that resulted in $79 million in high priority items dropping off the table in the back office in late May. MCTL's perspective, wouldn't it be better to determine priorities if the executive submitted a budget crosswalked to the cost of the agency strategies that include base spending and performance improvement targets based on this disclosed increased numbers of residents served?
Okay, a lot to unpack there, but let me try my. Okay, so first of all, thank you. I think this might be the only group that would ask me to be able to talk about the changes that we're making for supplemental and special appropriations. I'm very happy about this. I've been working at this for a couple of years and raising this concern. And I think we started today, actually. Today was the first of these appropriations, $350,000 for the drone as first responder program from the police. The council did not fund that because we didn't have enough information of what that program actually was going to be. The executive branch has done their work now. They were required to come back to us with a real plan and real information. And there have been 2 public meetings, and there was a public hearing, and now we know exactly what that program is going to look like. And in fact, the council weighed in with some suggestions on how to make sure that the policy that they are undertaking is written down and is shared so that the community understands it. So I'm really happy about that. I had suggested an approach like this last year, and there was not enough support to move this forward. And fortunately, now there was, and so now we're moving forward with this. And you know, I joke that another colleague suggested something similar, and I think she probably sold it better than I did.
Right. Because
Which
we
is good.
expanded it, yeah, from Silver
Well,
Spring.
you know, I think it's a good process. So here's what our process is, just so you know.
Yeah.
These special appropriations are supposed to be rare. We're supposed to do them only when there's an emergency that needs to be met or an unforeseen circumstance that couldn't have been anticipated. It's not supposed to replace the regular budget process. We have a budget process for a reason. It happens once a year. We should hold ourselves to that. And what happened was during COVID, we had hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government, and we had major emergency needs. And so there's a perfectly reasonable rationale for why these emergency appropriations, these special appropriations, were happening with regularity. Totally legitimate. Now, you know, how we did that and some standard, you know, I obviously was very vocal on those things. But the challenge was we got so comfortable with that idea that it started becoming a standard practice, or you know, moving in the direction of, well, if we don't get something during the budget, we'll just do a special appropriation, which is really like a backhanded way of ignoring reserves. And, you know, that's just not a good way to approach it. So you want to have enough flexibility to be able to meet emergencies and meet needs that happen in real time. And we have built a reserve for a reason so that we can have that flexibility in real time within reason. But you don't want to abuse it. So the question is, how do you find that right balance? And that's really the secret sauce to budgeting from my perspective, particularly, you know, in a multi-billion-dollar enterprise like ours at our level. Like, you don't want to have too strict of rules that you can't break, because that's fiscally irresponsible just as much as, you know, having no rules is. You know, so finding that right middle is important, which I've worked really hard to do. So in this case, appropriation comes in, special appropriation comes in, whether it's from the county executive or the council, and there's different standards, and you know, that we don't need to go into that, but basically it doesn't matter. There is a time that is, you know, a standard practice that we're going to try to abide by, which is good. And then most importantly, over a certain amount, and a fairly nominal, you know, small amounts, you may not have to go through the rigorous process, but, you know, a reasonable amount of money, and you know, even in the hundreds of thousands, not just the millions, and you saw that today, it will go both to the Committee of Jurisdiction and to the GO Committee. My reason for that is that it shouldn't just be about the policy issue and is there a need, because there are, you know, virtually unlimited needs that we could spend money on, but there's an eye towards the fiscal dynamic. And by having the GO Committee in each of those conversations, there's one, an eye on the fiscal policies, number one, and number two, there's an aggregate eye on all of the special appropriations. So, you know, each committee isn't taking up their own without really, you know, thinking about what does this mean in the aggregate and giving the context, you know, more broadly. So we did this for the first time. I think it worked really well. I'm very happy about it. We'll see how it progresses, but this would be an example of, we don't have to wait till I'm council president to implement, you know, a change that I have been advocating for. This is a change that has been made. I think everybody was pretty happy about it today, even though there wasn't universal agreement from the beginning about it, because there was, you know, concern that this would hold things up, or it's hard to schedule, you know, and joint committees are the hardest to schedule because it's a lot of people. But I think today we proved that this is a system that could work, and we'll, you know, continue to see how it goes. Your other questions about just general, can we make the process more transparent? That's always been my goal. I will continue to push for that. You know, I have lots of thoughts and ideas. I don't have specific plans, you know, up to this point, but just know that that has always been my interest, to continuously find ways to make the process better, and to make it more transparent, more accountable, to make sure that we are not just I joke around like the Seinfeld standard, like the reservations. It's one thing to take the reservations, but the key is really to hold the reservation. Like it's one thing to have a policy. The real key is to keep the policy, is to
Yes.
follow the policy. So that's, that's the standard. I try to remind myself that and colleagues of that. Your question about the rec list, the rec list is kind of an interesting dynamic. So I don't think you're ever going to get out of a dynamic in any legislative body that has, budget authority, where there is some form of priority sharing, horse trading, people, because you have to get to a majority. And there's nothing really wrong with that, to be honest with you. The question is the spending being scrutinized in a way that is appropriate, and do people, understand it? Now, if you compare, there's a lot made about our rec list. If you look at like the state budget, for instance, their entire budget is done that way. Like there is nothing about the state budget that is, individual votes taken on individual items in public view. The standard for the council, the council is, among the most transparent budget bodies that oversee a budget that is, many $billions. It's not perfect. It could get better. I'm committed to, working on that, but I just think we have to like understand the context here. The rec list, this rec list was challenging because normally the rec list is just additional priorities that individual committees agree to put on that are not in the base budget that the county executive has suggested. So essentially we get a county executive budget, and unless we agree to reject it outright in the beginning, we're essentially assuming that we're going to end up with something along the lines of that budget. And then each committee takes a bite out of certain pieces to cut things, and they add on things that they want. And the idea is we don't agree of what things go on until the very end. And generally it's a relatively small amount of money, and generally it's dollar in, dollar out. So, historically, the way that the budget has worked is give or take based on information by the end, cuts that are made, things that are moved around, maybe state funding that wasn't totally fleshed out in March 15th, but is fleshed out by, April 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, whenever Sunny Die is and the state budget is completed. And so that comes into focus, and you get what's left, which is like $10 or $15 million generally of wiggle room. And generally the rec list is what the council is going to decide to do to fill the remainder of the money that is available under the budget allocation that we have in front of us based on, the net result. In this case, it was different because the cuts that were being made to offset a 10% property tax increase, and everything that the county executive added on to his budget from the prior year was considered a rec list. The idea being the county executive shouldn't have his priorities, effectively automatically held, included in the budget, right, while council members don't. And so we put it on a level playing field, which to me was not an unreasonable thing for Evan Glass as council president to have suggested as a process, which was the process. The challenge we had, and where I would have done it a little bit differently, is not taking a vote on the overall amount of money we wanted to spend in the beginning. Mm-hmm. So generally, the assumption is we more or less know the amount of the budget that we're going to have at the end. And so it makes those end decisions, relatively nominal in the scheme of, a $6.78 billion budget. 15 million, while not nothing, is a relatively nominal amount of money, which makes sense for council members to, work with colleagues to figure out support for different priorities so that constituent needs can be met. Mm-hmm. In this case, it was all the new spending, which, was a lot, and the tiered approach that made it a challenge. So, I think it was an unprecedented situation, a challenging environment. Had I been in a different, circumstance or looking back now in retrospect, I think perhaps the only way to have changed that in a meaningful way in real time would have been to take a vote on essentially exceeding the SAG. So before you take a vote on the property tax increase, you would take a vote on the SAG. And in order to exceed the SAG, there was a 7-vote requirement. And so if there weren't 7 people who were willing to exceed the SAG to the level that the county executive wanted, which there weren't at first, and that was kind of known but not voted on. And then it would have been, okay, what is the number to get to that 7 people agree is a reasonable number? We kind of did it, the opposite of that. And again, not illegitimate or unreasonable, but just a different approach. And I think it might have led to, modestly different outcomes.
Can I interject at this point, Esther?
Yes, please.
Andrew segued us into the question that we have somewhere on the list about the spending affordability guideline process, which was clearly Wild West this year. Hundreds of millions of dollars in differences between the spending affordability guidance and the county executive's surprise tax increase and surprise budget request recommendation. But much of it was the difference in the property taxes. And I guess the spending affordability process, and we had a meeting not too long ago on this subject. It appears that it's revenue driven. And as you talked, Andrew, about the reconciliation process, that's not necessarily revenue driven. There is some horse trading, of course, but it's about priorities. And our question, I guess, for you is, how do we avoid that from happening again? Because there's every reason to expect that the county executive will come in with a surprise tax increase in the spring, and it'll be Wild West all over again. Are you the sheriff?
We'll find out. Yeah, that's TBD. So we'll know when it happens if I am or not. But yeah, so like I said, so we were in an unprecedented situation, right? This I wouldn't say it's a quirk of state law, but this elements of state law to bypass the unanimous vote requirement for property taxes, put us in a different situation. Previously, and I know this because I lived it, because I led the effort to oppose the county executive's property tax increase recommendation during COVID. I drafted the statement where 8 of 9 council members, dead on arrival property tax increase, in the midst of COVID, even some who were okay with property tax increases, at a certain point at the right time, didn't think that was the right moment. And, I thought that was a very powerful statement. What that did was it set the entire budget process from there. We had established we are not going to entertain a property tax increase, and therefore we knew what the amount of money was that we were willing to entertain. In this case, it was a different standard because it was a majority, which we've never had that standard before. So the second that one person, which could be me or another colleague, but the second that one person said, "Listen, I'm not going to entertain a property tax increase right now. I think we got to exhaust other options." That was it. It was over. And so that's how the council has operated up to this point, where that really dictated the terms of the entire budget process. That gave guidance to the staff. That gave guidance to each of the committees and their work. That allowed the council president to set a policy to say, "Listen, we're not going to increase taxes because, or at least the tax rate, because that's what one colleague has said. We know that, so let's move forward with the process within the confines that we now have established." This was different. It was intentionally different. The county executive, put this forward, on purpose. It did not just increase funding for education, as you know. Everything in the budget was increased dramatically. Actually, the non-education spending in county government was increased higher than education. I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. That's the difference. So as I said, the trigger was not majority for a tax increase. The real trigger was, are there 7 votes to exceed the SAG? And what number above the SAG are there 7 votes? Are there 7 votes that are willing to exceed it? So it's clear by the end that there were 7 votes to exceed the SAG. The question was by how much, and we didn't really determine that until the very end. And what happened was it became a question of, are there 7 votes for a particular tax increase? Are there 8 votes for a particular tax increase? So that's that. So that became the conversation. It wasn't about what's the number. It became about what's the tolerance level for the level of tax increase that people were willing to accept. And if there became a consensus at a certain point, a higher number than I was comfortable with. Obviously, I was the only person to vote against the property tax increase because it was too high. Some people voted against it because it was too low.
Right.
And I respect their opinions. I just had a different.
Sure.
But that was the standard. So the question that you asked, a poignant question, a very important question, is how do you make the SAG work? And my view would be you take a vote on it. So like that's the standard. We do have to take a vote on it. We did take a vote on it. We took a vote on it at the very end. And so, again, it's a question of now or later. I don't know that it would have been any different. I can't speak to that, to be honest with you. But I know that at least we would have known and we would have been able to set a number. I voted against the property tax increase. I came up with a scenario based on a combination of cuts, of vacancy, lapse, and other dynamics where we could fund MCPS at the level we ultimately funded them, which was basically $215 million above their previous request. We could have done that without a tax increase. It would have been tough. This was not an easy decision, but there were choices. There were options. But ultimately, it became clear. I mean, to be honest with you, it became clear among some colleagues that there was a critical mass of folks above the threshold for SAG that were willing to accept, that were not going to accept a 10% tax increase, but were willing to accept, somewhere in the 5 range, and ultimately that's where we ended up, somewhere in the 5 range. So, but to your question of how do you make SAG work, you vote on it, and you need 11 people or at least 8 people committed to it. I mean, there's the aggregate operating budget vote as part of the spending affordability guidelines. There's a voting threshold for that, and if people are willing to exceed it, then they're willing to exceed it. I mean, ultimately we do function in a democratic system where there are voting thresholds, and we all take votes, and everybody has their own political views and policy views and philosophies, and I think it's our job to hold us accountable to that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great segue and a way for us as residents and taxpayers to reach out to our district council representatives and tell them, hey, I would like you to vote this way. I did that for the first time. My councilwoman is Councilmember Lutke. And so I reached out to her office often, and I made my voices heard, and she took note of it. However she vote was on her, but she was informed of what I am asking. And I think that's great for us to provide that perspective. And so I see, Zayin, you have raised your hand with a question for VP Friedson, and then maybe we'll go back to the pre-submitted questions. You have a thought there, Gordy? Or
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, please.
Thank you. So how are you doing today, sir? I've met you before. I met you at the town hall at an elementary school in like the Wheaton Silver Spring area you did not too long ago.
Oh,
Yes.
Weller? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had a great conversation. I really liked what you said that day. And you're one of the council people, not that I dislike any council people, but you're one of the council people that I really like. I think that what you're how you're trying to get money into the county, how you want to move the money, what you want to do with the money is like, I'm in line with a lot of that. There are some things that I thought, MCPS, for example, I'm all for giving the larger budget. However, the scores just haven't been that good. As a parent, we're still the ones having to, sit there for hours after school to get our children ahead. the school doesn't really provide anything extra to us to help us. I mean, my kids are doing fine. They're doing great. They have great grades. But I just know how much work goes into making sure that they're first in class. With their budget, I thought that they were going to do something extra. Anyways, I'm sorry. I'm going to touch on a few points here. And if you've talked about some of them, I'm going to touch on a few. So for budget priorities, Montgomery County's FY25 operating budget is a crucial aspect of our community's well-being. Could you share some insights into key priorities that will shape this budget and how they align with the needs and expectations of taxpayers? If you could also touch on housing affordability, anything you can tell us about that with what happened recently. Our mortgages for a lot of people have gone up $200, $400, $600. Rent control, it's a topic that often generates diverse opinions. Can you provide an overview of the discussion surrounding rent control? For MCPS oversight, MCPS and OIG play a crucial role in ensuring transparency and accountability within the education system. Could you collaborate on recent developments or priorities with MCPS and OIG? And just as community engagement, what can we do to help you all in getting the information, as you spoke earlier about the drone not having the information? There's a lot of smart people in the county that are willing to help you guys make the right decisions.
Thank you so much. Let me try my best to go through those. So it's great to hear from you. It was great to see you at the council town hall. So budget priorities, I can't speak to next year's budget in terms of what is going to be in it. The county executive proposes it. It will be proposed, the operating budget on March 15th. The capital budget is proposed on January 15th. We get it. And I think the famous line from Mike Miller at the state level used to be the governor proposes and the legislature disposes. So, we will see. I don't know that we quite do it at that level. He served from 1986 when I was born, the year that I was born, until he retired just a few years ago before his unfortunate passing. But I have not had the level of experience that he has had to have that level of power to just dispose of a multi-billion-dollar budget. But ultimately, it is up to the council. But generally, we don't. I have my own individual priorities that, like I said, have been relatively consistent. But ultimately, we don't have a chance to really weigh in on that and make the changes like you're talking about until March. But from March to May, it's really the council's decision. So stay tuned, stay engaged, weigh in on those issues because you will have lots of opportunity. I know that Gordy will testify at the council on his views on the budget. There'll probably be some WSSC rate comments and a few other dynamics, some MCPS stuff as well. I have no doubt, but I hope you will join him and others as well on that. On housing affordability, this is a huge issue for me. As I mentioned, I've been focused on it a lot. I have done a ton on this. There's a lot more to do. As you heard Esther mention, I led the effort to create a $100 million fund with Housing Opportunities Commission to create mixed income housing. We have dramatically increased by tens of millions of dollars the funding that we have for affordable housing in the county. We have increased the amount of MPDUs, the moderately priced dwelling units, in master plans in the zoning areas of the county and different communities, and raised that threshold. Montgomery County was actually the creator of the idea of what's called inclusionary zoning, with the idea that if you build a certain number of new units, that you have to dedicate a certain amount to effectively workforce housing between 60 and 80% of the area median income. The idea that the private sector would be required to produce affordable housing and not just subsidized by the public sector was a novel concept that has been adopted by most jurisdictions now around the country in some form or fashion. So we've continued to push on that. I've in the process now of creating a new $50 million nonprofit affordable housing fund. So stay tuned on that. The nonprofit housing fund that will be focused mostly on preserving what's known as naturally occurring affordable housing. So that generally is housing that was built more than 20 years ago. it was built as luxury housing, by the way. This idea that new luxury housing is bad because it doesn't serve people who need it. It's not true. It's just it's young. It's 20 to 25 years early for the naturally occurring affordable housing. And a lot of our housing stock is 50, 60, 70 years old, and some of the most important affordable housing for particularly for young workers and for vulnerable residents, immigrants, new arrivals to the community, families who are relying on it. They're oftentimes living in older units that are quality, good units, but they're older, and so they serve that threshold of 60 to 120% of area median income, which is what the Council of Governments is looking at. Actually, they go up to 150 of area median income, desperately needed housing for people who are making, what I would consider to be like a normal wage. 150% area median income means you're making like $150,000 to $160,000 or less, as a family. So that's, two teachers in the school system for 10 years, like that's what you're making generally, or two firefighters, or two police officers. We need more of that. I can go on and on of things we've done. We've eliminated the housing moratorium and done a number of other things to try to facilitate more housing. But the bottom line is this: we can only nurture nature. The economy is nature. We are a county government, and it is a supply and demand problem. And there are more people who want housing, and there are fewer housing units for the people who want them. That's why during COVID, single-family home sales went through the roof in Montgomery County and in suburban jurisdictions all throughout the country, because you had an influx of added demand of a huge increase in a short period of time, and you had a lack of people who wanted to sell because people didn't want to move because it was a global pandemic. And that was just the exacerbation of a condition that has existed for a long time and continues to persist because we generally built enough housing after World War II. We built a ton of housing. We took a little bit of a cooling off period because people needed to settle in, and there wasn't a lot of transition. And then we built a lot of housing in the 80s, kind of 70s and 80s again. The next generation and the farther out, the next kind of level of farms turning into subdivisions and townhome communities. And then we built almost nothing in the 1990s and early 2000s, almost nothing from a statistical standpoint. And we are now barely doing what we used to do in the 80s in terms of building new units, which will come close to catching up to what we didn't build throughout the 90s. And we've got to get out of that view and understand that there are supply and demand dynamics, and housing is important. Again, we can't subsidize our way out of this problem exclusively. Subsidies are a key part of affordable housing strategies, but ultimately it needs to be an environment where the private sector can build housing and where the government then can strategically invest in affordable housing projects and programs. I've tried to lead on that. I've also led on adding to our first-time homebuyer programs, to our programs that help existing vulnerable homeowners at risk of losing their homes to be able to invest in their homes, to make necessary upgrades like their roof and their windows for weatherization, et cetera. So there's a lot of things that we can do. On rent control, it's a super complicated issue. I'll try to be very, break it down very simply. There were two proposals before the council. One was more of a consumer protection anti-gouging effort to prevent the horror stories that we were hearing of 20, 30, 40% rent increases. Those are not common. There's no evidence to suggest that they happen often, but it does happen. I say a lot, I used to do fiscal and economic policy, that the plural of anecdote is not data, but that anecdote is somebody's story. And to them, it's the only thing that matters. So we can't lose sight of that, but we have to separate facts from feelings. And so our concept, it started at 8% plus CPI. I was willing to compromise to drop it all the way down to have a cap at 9%, so that it couldn't exceed 9%, and that the protection would be for the tenant, not for the unit, because I don't think that structures deserve rights. I think that people deserve rights. Ultimately, another policy was adopted, a much stricter version of rent control that protects the units, but not people necessarily, which I think is the wrong approach. I think has unintended, severe unintended consequences, and lowered the number to a much lower number, to a 3% plus CPI or a 6% overall cap. My concern about that, however well-intended it might be, and it is, and I appreciate where it's coming from because people are absolutely rent burdened, is that it has the likelihood and potential, based on what we have seen where it has been tried in other places, of exacerbating the very problems that it's trying to solve. And as I said before, housing is a supply and demand problem more than anything. And the incentive to build housing has been dramatically reduced. And if you are reducing the interest in doing something, you're going to hurt the supply side. The demand side is not going to change. And so the inevitable, from an economic standpoint, is either there is a lack of investment in existing properties, and that deteriorates housing stock and makes it less livable and less quality, which is a bad outcome, and the maintenance is poor, et cetera. And or people are not going to build and keep housing. And so you'll have rental housing turned to condo, to homeowner, because it's a more advantageous option. And you'll have people making other choices with their housing. The reality is that rent in Montgomery County over the last decade and a half has increased about 2.1% on average per year, which is lower than the rate of inflation. So even today, one of the reasons why people aren't building housing is that rents actually aren't keeping up. Now, the baseline number is very high, and our incomes are not high enough to maintain that level. But I don't believe that rent control, however well-intentioned it might be, at this low of a level, will solve the problem. And I actually am afraid it might exacerbate the problem. I think doing the more consumer protection approach avoids the risk of hurting the supply challenge, which is the core of the problem, while providing a reasonable consumer protection so that you don't have a gouging. And that's what you see in other industries, whether it be drugs and prescription drugs and other things. You see a consumer protection, or frankly, toilet paper and water during a crisis and an emergency. A grocery store is not allowed to jack those up 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%. And so I think that's the type of consumer protection that we should provide. I think the version of rent control, I voted against it because I'm afraid of the unintended consequence. Hopefully that answered. You had a lot of very significant questions there, but I tried my best.
No, awesome job. Very thorough. And thank you, Zaim, for asking all of those questions. Those were all, overall questions that we received from various members. So thank you so much. And maybe I'll turn it over to Joan in interest of time. Maybe Council Vice President Friedson, are you okay to go maybe another 10 minutes?
Sure.
Okay. Yep. So I'll turn it over to you, Joan.
Okay, so actually I have a comment and a question. And my comment is, whenever people talk to various council members and they say, why aren't you doing X or Y about the public schools? The response always is, well, we have no control over the schools. Why, if you have no control over the schools, then why is it that the council every year funds the school system over and above the maintenance of effort level? Now, you are required to fund them at the MOE level, but when you fund them over, like last year it was 250,000, what are your expectations from what do you think they will do with the 250,000 to make a difference in the standards, in our educational standards of our children? So that wasn't really my full question. My question was really the IG. Why is it that we need a county IG to oversee the MCPS? Why don't we have an independent inspector general for MCPS who can work full-time on what we are now finding on a daily basis is horrible, rotten things taking place for which there was no supervision, no oversight, and nobody was asking the correct questions. So my question is, why should the county inspector, well, for this particular reason right now, I can see why, because there is no inspector general in MCPS. But how would you react to an MCPS independent inspector general who would have a full slate given what is happening in the schools? That's it.
Yeah, so appreciate the comment, and you're right. The power that the council and the county has is over money above MOE. And so you're right that last year, even at the request that we provided, which was lower than the request that came in, which was about 270 million above MOE, we funded about 215 million above MOE. That was a choice, and we made that choice. Now, I will say what I think that choice was based on was council members were not willing to accept new programs that they didn't have an understanding of what they would do and how they would work, and a real understanding of why we couldn't use federal funding to support them, because they're, the school system received hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding, at least some of which should be offset within the base budget. Like, for instance, some of the money went towards buying new technology devices. Well, presumably then you don't have to buy new technology devices, this year or next year. That should offset at least some money. Again, is that hundreds of millions of dollars? No, but we have no understanding, and I raised some of those questions of, okay, well, what are we offsetting then in the base budget? If we're doing a pilot, how are we going to determine whether or not it works or not? There are some lingering questions. What the 215 million more or less reflected was essentially the contract for the teachers. So there was a decision that was made, and you could disagree with it. I respect that. But we have a real challenge with teachers, retaining and recruiting teachers. And the decision was made that there was at least a majority, if not universal, view on the council. I believe it was universal, where everybody said, we want to honor the contract. So we want to make sure that the school system has no excuse not to honor the contract, to pay, additional funding for teachers and educators and staff. So that's what that went to. That was about a little over $200 million. So right about at that $215 million level, there was a placeholder at, I believe, 202 million. The ultimate number was a bit higher than that. So essentially, that's what the increase above MOE covered, with a little bit of blueprint in there as well. Now, the school system still said that didn't cover their cost. That our analysts didn't agree with that from analysis on our side, and so we felt like we had fully funded their ability to honor the contract and to carry out blueprint. And so that's where we ended up at that number. But you are right, that was a choice, and that we could have withheld that money and said we're only going to provide this if we get that. Now, I will say, in the throes of the budget, that's hard, and a lot of times that negotiation, at least historically, would have happened between the executive and the superintendent, or the executive and the president of the Board of Education, prior to the request going into the county. And then that negotiation used to happen. It wasn't transparent, admittedly, but it happened behind closed doors. That was the historic dynamic. And then, council members were, told what the deal was, and they could agree or disagree with what the deal that was made, and the focus on third grade reading and math, or on class size, or whatever the case may be. But you are right, and so I just want to acknowledge that.
So why are they moving funding from instructional salaries to other uses if they have more than enough than they need? So basically,
it's a fair point. And there's also, I raised the issue, with their fund balance, and there's been a historic fund balance yes, I agree on that. So agree on that.
Okay.
I do think it was important at a time when we were losing a lot of teachers and continue to have a real challenge with that, and are struggling just to keep up with having every classroom with an educator in it. And real issues there that we, just like I thought we needed to do with police and and public safety professionals. Like, I have pushed back on contracts before, but I thought this was not a moment, frankly, to do that. That was a choice that I made. I should be held accountable to that choice. But if you want to know my answer, and I went to public meetings and I talked to them, I said, here's where I'm at on MCPS. I'm going to honor educator, contracts, because in this moment, we absolutely are desperate to keep and to recruit teachers. Like, that's period, full stop. It's everything that I heard from families. Anything beyond that is up for debate. And, my view was the school system had to prove to us why they needed, additional funding. And ultimately, I think that's more or less where we landed, which I don't think was necessarily a bad place. I think the real choices in the budget, to me, in addition to that, we're on the county government side, and we did add a lot of new positions when we had 1,500 vacancies, which, by the way, we still have 1,500 vacancies, which I predicted. And, we could have done other things, and we could have made choices. And, I think that's the challenge that we have. It's not that any of these things individually aren't priorities and aren't important. It's that you can't do everything all at once. You have to make decisions. You have to make choices. Choices are tough. And I don't think we make enough choices. I think that has been our issue up to this point. On the OIG, I respect 100% where you're coming from, Joan, and we've talked about this for a few years. But I would say give what we're doing now a chance, because I don't necessarily agree, and I'm not quite sure how having a separate inspector general in MCPS would solve the problem you're trying to solve, that we can't solve in what we're doing now. Now, I will say, historically, the county's inspector general did not have authority to do anything in MCPS, and basically had asked for permission and anything. And it was like, there was no real authority. That has changed under state law. We now have that, which we before I advocated for, others advocated for, and so now we have that. So in addition to the strengthening and increasing the Office of the Inspector General, which has been a hallmark of my efforts on the Government Operations Fiscal Policy Committee, we added 2 positions this year specifically for that. And so the Inspector General now has 2 dedicated positions exclusively focused on MCPS, which I actually think is a better model, because I would have no authority. If there was an Inspector General in MCPS, I would have to trust that Inspector General was doing a good job. I wouldn't appoint that Inspector General. I wouldn't know that Inspector General. They wouldn't have resources in other areas. They wouldn't have the background of other stuff. So I actually think this is a pretty good situation that we're in for the first time, but it's new. Like, it hasn't even started yet. So any complaint that you have up to this point is based on the problems of the past. And my only suggestion is, let's see if the current situation will work. Let's give it a few years. Let's let Megan Lamarzi, who I think is doing an outstanding job as the Inspector General, and I'm very happy about her work. And as you know, I have spent a lot of political capital getting resources for that office, and to make sure that we were doing the type of oversight that I think is appropriate for a county government of our size. She now has specific people exclusively focused on MCPS. I think we could look at expanding that in future years, but I think let's start with these 2. That's exclusively what they're doing for her. They're not doing any other county government projects, and let's let them do their work. I think they're going to put out outstanding oversight, just like Megan and her team have done for county government. And it's going to help to hold MCPS accountable for the money that we're spending. And so and that was an important piece that came out of last year's budget that I don't think was talked about a whole lot, but I think is a very positive development.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we are at time. I definitely want to give you the last word. VP Friedson, is there any call to action? How can we help you be successful, either as president or just as a council member in all your committees? Please let us know how we can help and you guys be as successful as you can, and reach out to other community members.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for all that you do. My suggestion is to keep advocating. I think it's important that it not just be one person, Gordy or otherwise, coming to the council. That's important, and testifying in a public hearing. But, send emails, reach out to council members, hold us accountable. Make sure, if you're concerned about the spending affordability guidelines and holding ourselves accountable to it, or about the Inspector General, or about MCPS oversight, or fiscal policy, email, call, stay engaged. I know that you all are focused on these issues in a way that few others are. And so I think having your voice as part of the advocacy in a concerted way is really helpful. It's obviously good to have a uniform voice and testifying in a public hearing. But I think it's also important to hear from you otherwise. It's important for council members, individually to hear from residents so they understand that and make sure that you're reaching out to community members as well. I think you all are incredibly well versed in these issues, follow it incredibly closely. And I think sharing that work and that knowledge base with community members and making sure that they reach out and activating them as well, I think will be super helpful. And I just very grateful for that work and that engagement and activism. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And that's definitely in line with our vision for this year and definitely for the coming years. So thank you for that confirmation. And so with that, I thank you so much, Vice President Friedson, for your time today and talking with us. And we wish you all the success, and we will continue to support anywhere we can. So thank you everyone for joining, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.